Welcome to the Essential Skills for Humaning podcast, where we explore the fundamental abilities and insights that make us better humans. Here's your host, Christina Eanes.
Hi, everyone. Christina Eanes here. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Today, we're talking to Bonnie Lesney. Welcome, Bonnie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, before we get into this much needed topic, can you share a little bit about your background with our audience?
Sure. Well, where do I start? I guess I am in the counseling field and specifically in substance use counseling. And I have been doing that for a long time, since 2010. That's when I got into the field. And this is, I guess, similar to other people in the substance use field, unless you're in recovery and that's kind of something that you've gotten into. Most of us just kind of fell into that field by accident. And that's kind of what happened to me is I wanted to be a counselor. I've wanted to be a counselor since I was 15 years old, which is a whole story for another time. And I went to get my undergraduate degree in human services, and part of my internship, I had to go do, work in the field. And the only place that I could get a job working in the field that actually involved counseling, instead of legal work or social work or things like that, was in adolescent outpatient treatment at the alternative high school, which was a little intimidating, but I was like, well, we'll do that. And so I started doing that at the high school, and I fell in love with it. And just happened to, you get out of undergrad and you just apply everywhere, right? My student loans are coming up in 6 months. Like, I got to get something coming in. And I applied everywhere and ended up getting a position at a medication assisted treatment program in substance use counseling. And so I'm like, obviously the fates, want me to do this. And I started doing it, and I absolutely loved it. And then I moved up through the ranks, became a program director, started doing more administrative type things, and then also clinical supervision as part of that. I got my certification in clinical supervision and started doing that, and then kind of moved more into that role after about 2018. Moved into an area clinical supervision role and was supervising about 50 to 60 counselors in North and South Carolina.
Ooh.
So really kind of moved from counseling clients to guiding and coaching counselors, and really, really fell in love with that because I got to do more teaching, educating, coaching, and got to help more people, indirectly from helping counselors grow and develop and become counselors. And so that's, I did that at a large corporation for a while, a treatment program. And then that position was eliminated. And which I know wasn't going to mention escape rooms, but it was the day before, we opened the escape room business. So I stopped, working there and was working at our business full time. But then I had started my own business doing private supervision. So that's what I continue to do now, is private supervision for counselors that are working on their certification and license towards substance use counseling.
Nice. Yeah. We both find our joy in the development field.
Yes, absolutely.
In some form or fashion.
Love
right?
it. Love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the much needed topic today, maintaining balance and self-care. Where do you want to start? This is a huge area.
Yeah.
So where are we going?
So I wanted to kind of talk about, I guess, what the barriers are, like, because that's the why, like, right? Why are we talking about this? Like, why is this important? Why is this something, why is this something that we need to dive deeper in and take a deeper look at? So that was, kind of what I wanted to start with.
Sure.
And then of course we have the question, okay, what do we do about it?
But,
so I have, some, I guess, advice on that in that regard too. But, I know I kind of mentioned when we were talking about this, that I wanted to talk about self-care in like the modern world, right? Where it's, how is it different now than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago? And this is obviously also a topic that is applicable to everyone, but as you can imagine, for people that are working in the counseling field, super important.
Yes.
When I became a supervisor, I'm like, we can talk about cognitive behavioral therapy and like ethics and whatever all day long, and that's great. But who's talking about self-care with the counselors? Like, who's making sure
Yeah.
they're okay while they're making sure everyone else is okay? And when I started doing this with my counselors, they were like, thank you so much for like noticing,
Mm.
that we're not always okay. And so, it became a thing that I started to do every single year. It's like once a year, we're
Hmm.
going to spend time talking about self-care. And it wasn't like one time we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it for like 3 months. We're going to like really hammer it in there. And that's why, my husband was like, you can talk about this all day. And I'm like, I can. But that's kind of where I started really getting into this. So the,
Hmm.
modern self-care, yes, but also post-COVID is
Mm.
a really important kind of point to make when it comes to barriers, because COVID took everything that we knew about boundaries and like threw them into the air and got rid of them.
Yeah.
And we saw that in the mental health field and substance use field, because obviously it was an unprecedented, situation,
Hmm.
and everybody just survived, right? Like everybody did what they
Yeah.
could to like get through, and medication assisted treatment programs are an essential service, right? Like
Hmm.
we operate like a hospital, like we can't not get people their medication. So I had
Yeah.
counselors that were just, you know, doing everything that they could just to survive. And they're, dealing with
Yeah.
their own personal stuff. Obviously, COVID was a global trauma. So we're also
Hmm.
dealing with the aftermath of like this global trauma where people are scared for health reasons. They're worried about lockdown again. People are dealing with trauma that was caused by quarantine, whether that's,
Hmm.
abuse, neglect, domestic violence, like all of those things that people had to deal with during COVID. So that's one of, a barrier to self care in and of itself, is just the global trauma that came on the heels of COVID, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, COVID made everyone accessible all the time, right? Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to counselors, I never thought I would see the day where a client would have a counselor's personal cell phone number.
Ooh.
Okay. I'm like, boundaries 101, like ethics 101, like, and it wasn't unethical during COVID. That was expected I mean, it was still
Yeah.
unethical, but like it was necessary, because it's like no one was equipped with Zoom or with, company Google numbers and like things that no one really knew how to handle it. So it's like, well, clients got to get a hold of you, give them your personal number. And
Yeah.
they didn't change their number, and now it's 4 years later they still have their personal number. And so that's just that having to be accessible all the time. When
Yeah.
employees started working from home, what did the employer expect? Well, you're working from
Yep.
home, you need to be accessible every single moment that I need to access you. Like, what do you mean lunch break? What do you mean this? Like, I have to access you all the time. And so that got rid of any kind of boundaries when it came to I'm at work, I'm at home. People, I had counselors come and say to me, like, I get off and I just like turn around and now I'm off.
Mm.
Like, I don't, there's no clear boundary
Yeah.
between when I'm at work and when I'm at home. So, it kind of led to that constant connection and constant accessibility. So that's kind of I guess, my COVID spiel, and like how that kind
Hmm.
of impacted our ability to engage in self-care, kind of the boundaries
Oh,
between,
absolutely.
you know, our own self and what we're dealing with, and then everything else in the world that's going on around us. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of and then we have the modern technology side of it, where it's like,
Oh,
yeah, where it's like,
yeah.
okay, we're constantly being bombarded with distressing stuff, right? Like,
Hmm.
constantly the media has taken over, everything that we believe about ourselves, the world, and others. So we're kind of dealing with that. We're dealing with social media and the keeping up with the Joneses and the way that we need to present and appear. So that can kind of take over. And then
Hmm.
generally speaking, in today, if we want to go up to today, the financial struggles that everyone is dealing with, that kind of takes over. And I was going to talk more about the 8 dimensions of wellness, which is where, I would send everyone at the end of this, but the 8 dimensions of wellness,
Yeah.
financial is one of those. And when you're pouring all of your gas into that one tank because you're
Yeah.
surviving, what does it leave for the rest of the tanks that you are trying to maintain balance in?
Not much.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess that would be kind of the barriers or like the struggles that we have thus far. So,
Well, now that we're all stressed out, let's
yes.
talk about how to take care of that stress.
Yes. So that the first thing that I talk about when it comes to self-care is knowing what to assess, right? Like
Hmm.
when you're doing a self-care self-assessment, I guess, the first thing is like, what do I even look at? What am I checking? Because the one thing I used to say all the time when I had self-care training with my counselors is I cannot stress this enough that self-care is more about massages and days off and, stopping and smelling the roses. Like
Yes.
that's all fine and that sounds good. And those are all positive things and they do contribute to self-care, but self-care is deeper than, just those like, oh, I'm going to take a day off, a mental health day, or I'm going to, do this, that, or the third. Like it's a whole way of living that you have
Hmm.
to change and alter to be able to maintain positive self-care. So the first thing that I would recommend or first piece of advice is knowing what you need to assess. Learning how to maintain an active balance, and I'll talk about tanks in a second, but and then knowing what your areas of weakness are. So
Hmm.
if you have an area of weakness where it's like, well, I am really bad at taking care of my physical health, and I use a lot of diet and exercise analogies just because it's relatable and it makes sense to most people. But if you know that that's a point of weakness for you, but it's like, well, but I'm working so hard and I'm being such a good mother and I'm doing all of these things, but I know that taking care of my physical self is not, my strongest suit.
Yeah.
That's something that you need to be aware of when you're assessing, what that looks like. So, I mentioned earlier the 8 dimensions of wellness. That
Hmm.
is put out by, or was originally put out by SAMHSA, and which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. For anyone not familiar with that, it's a federal organization that kind of oversees substance use and mental health services. And so they have what they call the 8 dimensions of wellness, which is a really good guide to knowing what tanks you need to fill. And I say tanks because it makes more sense in my brain. The 8 dimensions of
Yeah.
wellness is like usually seen as like a wheel because
Hmm.
none is more important than the other or whatever. So like that's the idea is it comes in a wheel and it's not in a, sequence.
Yeah.
But there's a wheel and then each dimension like covers kind of certain parts of wellness. Um, in my brain, I like it to think of it as gas tanks. So
Yes.
every,
Same here.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you can feel, you can move, you can kind of see where you've got. And one of the questions I usually pose is like, is there really any such thing as balance? Can you have all tanks perfectly balanced at any time? Probably not, right? Like
Right.
that's just not how life works, that you get to have all your tanks perfectly balanced. So the analogy makes sense to me. But I can kind of go over like real quick, like what the dimensions are,
Yes, please.
and kind of what you'll be looking for. So I would say the first one, there's not a first one. There's no particular order. One of them is
Yeah.
emotional. So that one's kind of straightforward. Like, they have coping effectively with life and creating satisfying relationships. So like kind of your
Hmm.
emotional functioning, regulation, all of that. The next is we mentioned before, financial, right? So satisfaction with your current financial situation and also where you're going, like where your finances are going. Social is developing a sense of connection, belonging, a well-developed support system. So having that social support and interaction that you need. Spiritual, your sense of purpose and meaning, which again,
Hmm.
that's a whole another conversation too, is like purpose and meaning and how it contributes to mental health and substance use recovery and things like that. But anyway, so spiritual is like your meaning in life. And that could be religious, it could be not, whatever that looks like for
Yeah.
you. Occupational is the work that you do. So again, whatever that looks like for you, but having that personal satisfaction, you're enriched, you're finding meaning and purpose in what you're doing. Physical, we talked about physical,
Hmm.
activity, sleep, diet, nutrition, all of those good things. Intellectual, so like being able to use your knowledge and hone your intellectual skills and feeling stimulated intellectually and things like that. And then environmental, So that's, your environment is stimulating, you feel supported, you feel safe, like all of those kinds of things. So those are the 8 tanks that we're trying to fill. So if you're doing, and there's a common activity that has like a wheel and you color in each dimension
Mm-hmm.
as like where you're at.
Like the wheel of life.
Yeah. So where you can
Yeah.
kind of say like, well, this one's really full. And I talk about too, with the whole you can't exactly maintain perfect balance, is that there are times in life, obviously, where some of those wheels are going to become really important and take
Yeah.
over everything else, right? So if your finances are struggling, you don't care about your physical health or your social life or like anything like that. You are doing everything you can to hustle and to pay your bills and like to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's different things. Like maybe if you are suffering from like, a physical condition, or you were just diagnosed with cancer, or you have something like that going on, like you might not have a lot of gas for these, for your
Yeah.
emotional tank, or like your occupational tank might be like, doesn't matter right now because I am pouring everything into this. So I guess I say all that to say that you just need to know what you're looking at, like what tanks are full and which
Yeah.
are not. Is this a temporary situation where, I'm in school right now, but I graduate in 3 months and this is going to be better? Like, or is this
Yeah.
something that's a chronic, I've been neglecting this for years and I need to go, really take a hard look at this and address it. So the first step then is to kind of assess, right? And know where
Yeah.
that is. And the other thing I say about that too is that self-care happens on a minute to minute basis, not,
Yeah.
it's not like, okay, don't wait until you're like sick and burned out and ready to quit your job. And like, before you say like, oh, I should take a day off. And it's like, it's too late now. Like you've already let
Yes.
it get too far. This is like a moment to moment thing where you're making a decisions all day, every day that
Yeah.
contribute to or take away from your wellness, right? Like whatever that
Yeah.
looks like. So, I give an example of like, let's say that you went to work and you had a really hard day and you're like drained emotionally, this is a good example for counselors, right? So I use it.
Yeah.
You're drained
Or
emotionally,
anyone.
anyone. But this is the first thing I think of with counselors. I'm like, you had like 6 sessions and you're drained and like
Yeah.
it's been a rough day and you've been like, you started your diet today, right? And
Oh.
you get to lunchtime and you pull your sad salad out of the refrigerator and you're looking at it and you have a coworker that's like, hey, I'm going to cook out. Like, do you want anything? And in that moment, you have a self-care decision to make, right? And
Yes.
it's like, okay, I I'm on a diet, but I don't have major health issues. Like I'm not diabetic. Like I'm not this my health isn't a threat to me right now. Like so this I
Mm-hmm.
just want to fit into my clothes again. You know what I mean? Like maybe
Yeah.
that's where you're at, but I am emotionally just falling apart right now. And that
I need a
that
burger.
that cookout burger is really gonna like, make get the dopamine going here for a minute. Like, and I really need that. Then that's okay, right? Like, so it's like
Yeah.
in that moment, I made that decision to eat the burger and to feel better. And also maybe I went with them and now I filled my social tank too,
There
right?
you
I
go.
left the
Yeah.
office. I got away from that environment. I had a cheeseburger, which maybe takes from my physical tank, also makes me feel better too. It
Mm-hmm.
filled my emotional tank. It filled my social tank. Like it took a little out of my physical tank, but my physical tank is pretty full. It's not that
Mm-hmm.
drained. So like it was all okay. And so that's what I mean. It's like kind of keeping the tanks, full, but
Yeah.
maybe tomorrow, like I need to, stick with what I've
Not
got.
go
But
to
right. I
another
need to
cookout.
not
Yeah.
continue to do that. I need to, make better decisions on that tomorrow. And it's just kind of a day to day, like it goes day to day where you just have to,
Yeah.
make those decisions. And, I tell people too that it's okay to change what your self care looks like. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
something that might have filled your cup yesterday might drain you today, even if it's something
Yeah.
positive. Like I had a client one time that he started volunteering for the church for the AV stuff during the worship services. And
Mm-hmm.
he was like, oh, I love it. I'm learning all this stuff. I've met all these people. It's really good support, all of this. He did that for like, I don't know, 6 to 8 months or something like that, maybe a little bit longer. And he was like, comes in, he's like, oh, I got to do the AV thing tomorrow. Like, I'm really burning
Yeah.
out. I'm really dreading it. And I'm like, it's okay to step back. Like I
Yeah.
get, but it used to just give me so much joy. I'm like, but it doesn't now.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, so
Yeah.
assessing those things too, my own personal example of that is that I was working on my dissertation for a while. I was doing my dissertation. I did everything but the dissertation for my PhD, and I worked on it. And I just, semester after semester was going by, and I just couldn't sit down and do it. I just lost my heart,
Yes.
for it. And I felt so guilty because I'm like, I don't want to give up. I did everything else but this, I even wrote the
Uh-huh.
third chapter, I had started it. I was like, I don't want to, I feel so guilty. I feel so guilty, but I also feel guilty spending this money on something that I'm not progressing on. And this isn't in my heart anymore. Like, it's causing me
Yeah.
more guilt and stress not working on it than if I just were to say, you know what? I'm done here. I can go back if I
Yep.
want to or not. It's fine. That's fine too.
Or not.
And that was one of the best things for self-care that I ever did, was like quitting and giving that up. So it's like you also have
Yes.
to be willing to like step away from things that aren't giving you that joy. Just because it used
Yeah.
to doesn't mean it will forever. And
Does it mean,
that
wow.
is
Yeah.
absolutely acceptable. So, and I think that goes into, another couple of points is that not doing self-care the way that you feel like it should be done, but the way that works for you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I see so many people, again, diet, exercise, this is an easy example. They're like, okay, well, I want to lose weight, or I want to get healthier, whatever their goal is. And they're like, I'm going to stop eating all carbs, and I'm going to work out 7 days a week for an hour a day. And it's like,
Oh my
but do
gosh.
you want to do that? Like, is that like really give you joy? Like, is that, and maybe it does, and there's plenty of people that like, really are into that. But most people, when
Mhm.
they're starting their journey, like they don't look forward to that. I mean, look at The
Yeah.
Biggest Loser and how many people gained all that weight back, once they were
Yeah.
off the show. And like Mark and I talk about, the personal trainers that you see on TV, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
keep going. I don't care if you're throwing up. And like, we're like, you're not going to make this person
Uh,
want to come back and do this again. Like, this is
uh-uh.
not something that's enjoyable. So if you are dreading going to the gym every day, don't go to the gym. Like, there's
Yeah.
so many other ways to be more active than going to the gym. I mean, there's lots of
Yeah.
different things that you can do. And so it's, part of the, once you've assessed and you kind of know what areas you need to work on, find a self-care plan that you like. Like, if
Yes.
you need to,
That you're going to stick to.
yes, if you're going to if you have an empty tank, like, fill it with something that gives you joy, like that you want to
Yeah.
do, like not something that you're dreading all the time. Because like you said, I mean, you're not going to stick to it. You're setting yourself up for failure, or for it to just be miserable. Like, who wants to be miserable all
Yeah.
the time? Like, that's going to drain another tank. So like,
Yes.
let's just, there's something that can be done for everyone if you are willing to kind of sit down and say like, okay, what are some things that I genuinely enjoy, whether it's reading, whether it's walking, whether it's, playing with your kids, whether it's cooking, whatever that might look like. There's a way to take that and help it fill a tank
Yeah.
instead of emptying one. There's you is if you're willing to kind of sit down and think about like, okay, well, I can do this. How can I make this more active if that's your, the tank that you need to fill? Or how can I, make this a financial gain? Like, maybe you enjoy baking, and so you start selling cookies at your craft fair, or like whatever. I mean, there's ways that you can take what you love and you can make it into something that fills a self-care tank and that doesn't empty one, right? If you're
Yeah.
willing to take a look at that.
And then being open to change when it doesn't bring joy anymore. I
Exactly.
love that
Yes.
point.
Yes.
Yes.
That is something that I myself struggled with, for many, many years, where it's just like, it's just that guilt of like giving something up, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
you can maybe put that into the barriers in the modern world is guilt, right? A really
Yes.
strong impactful emotion that can really screw up your world if you let it. And that kind of goes into like, I guess my last point, which is defining boundaries and
Oh, yeah.
knowing, what that is. And we talk, I guess, in pop culture a lot about setting boundaries around self-care, which is important, right? Like having your me time and not being like, well, I was supposed to do this, but I guess I'll go do this. And, as a mom, the mom guilt is real too, where it's like, I should be
Oh,
doing this.
yeah.
And it's not just that. I mean, when I was a student, I talked to students too, and I'm like, how guilty do you feel when you're sitting there watching Netflix and you have a paper that's due? Like, what does
Yeah.
that feel like? It feels like crap, honestly. Like, it does not feel good.
Yeah.
I've been there too.
Yeah.
So it's just, but it's like, but you know what? I need this right now. And
Hmm.
saying like, it's easy to say you have to fill up your own cup before you can fill up others, but it is very, very hard for us to
Yes.
do, right? Like, it is so hard to say, like, because you feel we as a society say that you're selfish or,
Yeah.
whatever, people want to say about that. And it's like, no, that was actually the first point that I made on one of the presentations that I did was first things first, self-care is not selfish.
Yeah.
Like above
Oh,
everything else,
absolutely.
it is absolutely not selfish. It is what you need to survive. And you really can't help other people.
Mm-mm.
You have to put, my husband likes the term of putting your own oxygen mask first before you
Yep.
put on anyone else's. That's like his favorite, analogy.
Uh-huh.
I'm terrified of flying, so I hate that analogy. The thought of oxygen masks
Oh.
is like horrible. But it's true, right? Like you have to like take care of
Yes.
yourself first. And it's just, I think that, I know you haven't asked me, but I guess like my biggest kind of takeaway on this is like knowing how to make it to live more mindfully when it
Hmm.
comes to
Yeah.
self-care, where you're just kind of constantly kind of assessing where you're at. And even if you can't do anything about it right now, like I said, like if you're in school or you're doing, whatever, right now, and there's nothing you can really do about a certain tank that's being emptied or whatever, um, just know that it's there, right? Like,
Yeah.
know just that knowledge and that mindfulness of like, okay, I know this isn't the best right now, but I'm not going to let this get away from me. I have a plan to
Yes.
address it, when I'm able to address it. And then really setting those boundaries around it. And when you have that guilt that comes up of like, well, I know I had a boundary around this me time, but my kid has this thing, like stopping that, again, that mindfulness of being like, nope, I know why I feel this way. I know why I feel this guilt,
Yes.
but this is something that is necessary for me to be a better mother, spouse, you know, worker, subordinate, boss, whatever it is that you do. Like this is something that needs to be protected, and it's not selfish to do that.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Oh, I
yeah.
love that. Well, and I think foundational to all of it is being aware
Hmm.
and at choice,
Yes.
right? Awareness and at choice. And I love how you mentioned, I think this is a huge perspective shift for a lot of people that self care is a moment by moment thing.
Yes. That's my
I think that's
favorite.
huge.
Yes, that's
Yes.
my favorite part of it, because I think that, living mindfully is something that we should all practice, and again, it's a
Hmm.
practice. It's not a thing that you do, it's a thing that you practice. So it's like, but living mindfully and kind of being present in each moment and like recognizing it for
Yes.
what it is instead of saying like, and again, this is easier said than done. Obviously, there's other mental health disorders that can come in or issues,
Yeah.
emotional problems where that can become very difficult. Obviously, people with substance use disorders, they're not sitting there thinking like, well, I could go get my drug of choice or I could, no, their reptile
Hmm.
mind is turned on, their fight or flight mode. They're,
Yeah.
that's a different situation. But,
Yeah.
for most of us that aren't dealing with that or dealing with other issues that aren't like taking over our mental and emotional health, it's absolutely kind of a moment by moment and then giving yourself grace. Like if
Yes.
you made a
Yep.
decision that you didn't think was the right one, right? Where it's like, well, I made bad decisions today. I ate a cheeseburger instead of my salad. It's like, okay, that's okay. Like
Learn from it, move on.
Self-compassion, right?
Yes.
Self-compassion, letting go of like having to be perfect all the time. And that, even with okay, well, to do my self-care, I have to run on the treadmill for an hour every day or whatever. It's like kind of getting these ideas,
Yeah.
out of our mind of like what should be. That's a big substance use, a big recovery, idea too, is like letting go of the should.
Yeah.
I should do this. It should be this. This should be this way. This is what I should be doing.
Yeah.
I should have done this or should not have done that.
Mm-hmm.
So getting rid of that is, a good, I think, piece of advice for
Yeah.
those moment to moment decisions of self care.
I'm smiling because I like to call that shooting all over yourself.
Yes. Yes, I would tell you what it's called in REBT, but it might be inappropriate for your podcast. It's a similar thing that uses the word
Similar.
must. It's like must. I must do this. People must do this.
Uh-huh.
People must react this way, and he calls it
Uh-huh.
must something. I won't mention it on here, but yeah, it's that idea of like, being that pressure of like things need to be this way or things should be this
Yeah.
way. And again, it's not just, what I should do, but that also goes what other people should do and what,
Yeah.
how other people should react to things. No one should do anything, right? Like that's not a good way to be. But again,
Yeah.
I would call self-care a practice too. It's not,
Yeah.
no one is going to go forth. No one's going to listen to this podcast and be like, yes, I will self-care now. Like that's not, it's not a thing that you do.
Yeah.
It's a thing that you practice and you practice. And if you
Yes.
fall out of practice, you need to get back in, right? Like
Yeah.
if you don't use it, you can lose it, but you can also get it back, so you just, you have to kind of keep it at the forefront, of your mind. And that assessment piece, from the beginning is really just like moment to moment assessment. What do I need right now? Daily check-ins with yourself. That's a good thing to do at the end of the day. It's like, where are all my tanks at right now? Is there any that are glaringly empty that I need to do something tomorrow that can fill that tank? Just moment by moment, day by day, one assessment at a time. And overall, the idea is that your tanks stay relatively balanced. And if you have an emergency or you have a life situation that empties one of your tanks, and it will happen because we are human, right? Going back to your skills of humaning, we are human. And so one of your tanks is bound to just get drained one day because something happens. Then you have enough in your other tanks to refill the one that's empty. But when you're dealing with multiple empty tanks, that's when you see really serious, mental health disorders, physical problems, emotional problems. Yes, that's when it's an emergency, and you need to seek outside help to help you refill some of those tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I cannot believe how fast the time
I know. I told you. Right?
I know. This is awesome.
I could talk forever. I know.
Oh, I know. I love this. But I know people are going to want to know more.
Yes.
So what resources can they access? How can they look you up? Anything?
So I like I said, I really only do supervision, and I do some consulting, and I can do training and things like that. I've, lots of different resources and things like that. So my website is www.advancedaddictionsupervision.com. So that's my personal website that kind of tells more about me and my supervision and stuff like that. But I would really direct people to the SAMHSA.gov website. It's SAMHSA.gov. And they have more resources on the 8 dimensions of wellness. So they've got some free publications, PDF downloads on the 8 dimensions with more information about that. And then there's also, I've seen on Amazon, some workbooks that are available as well. So I don't have specific links to those, but if you Amazon the 8 dimensions of wellness, there are some workbooks and things like that you can go through if that is something that you're interested in learning more about. So those are the resources that I would direct people to for more information.
Nice. Well, I mean, if you're open to it, I could see people reaching out for speeches and workshops in this area because
Yeah.
it's definitely needed.
Yeah, it is definitely needed. I have
Yeah.
my training that I typically do with my counselors is obviously far more in depth. We
Hmm.
usually do like self-assessments during the workshops and kind of talk about like what are some common areas that we have where we're lacking in self-care. There's different assessments for different areas of self-care and things like that. So it's really enlightening for a lot
Yeah.
of counselors, and they're like, wow, I didn't know that I had 7 out of 10 signs of burnout. Like I thought I was good, because we
Yeah.
get that a lot too, where counselors are like, I say, I know we're kind of running over time, but one last thing is that we what I used to, when I interviewed counselors to work for us, one of the questions we would ask is like, what do you do for self-care, and how do you make sure that you are able to maintain self-care with all of these clients and everything they're dealing with. And they would always be
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm really good with self-care, I don't take it home with me.
Hmm.
And I'm like, so you have no awareness is what you're telling me, none whatsoever. Which it's like, I get, you're not thinking about your client that is using drugs when you get home. But I mean, how do you feel about the fact that you have 6 calls tomorrow, or six sessions tomorrow, and you've already haven't caught up your notes from yesterday, and your boss is on you about
Hmm.
getting those things in? Like, is that keeping you awake at night? Because that's kind of the same thing. Like that's
Yeah.
the same, falls into the same pot of
Yeah.
problems.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
so yeah, it's good.
Well, and I can see this is a much needed service. Like I know there weren't, when I was in the field of law enforcement, particularly violent crime analysis,
Mm.
there weren't any services to talk to people about these, at
Yeah,
least at that time.
yeah,
So who knows?
yeah,
Maybe so many more open areas.
yeah.
Anyway, okay, let's end with your final piece of advice.
I guess my final piece of advice is about the boundary situation, right? Like having,
Hmm.
if you really want to be well, I guess, in this life, you have to make that a priority. It is not something that happens passively. It is an active process, an active practice that you have to really be committed to and that you have to protect. So whatever that means in your life and your frame of, reasoning, you
Hmm.
have to set boundaries around that, and it has to be something that is a priority to you. And however you need to make that happen, whether it's setting a Google, calendar alert, or an alert on your phone, or having an accountability partner that's willing to ask you about these things, it is just as important as anything else in your life. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the things that we kind of used to say on that is like, if people say, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the energy, I don't have this, I don't have that. If you had a child and you were told that that child is going to die if they don't go get treatment tomorrow, and you had to fly across the country for a specialist to make that happen, would you say, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the resources?
Mm-mm.
No, you would get on a plane and you would go do what you had to do to save your child. Why won't you do the same for yourself?
Ooh.
So that's
Yeah.
my final thought on
Oh,
that.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bonnie.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Essential Skills for Humaning podcast. We hope you've gained valuable insights to enhance your journey as a human being. Remember, practice makes progress. Keep honing those essential skills, and until next time, keep being the best version of yourself. For more resources, visit eanestraining.com.